Okay, so hello and welcome to this short video on Solidity Basics. Today we're going to cover ways to send ETH to a smart contract. My name is Richard Jamison, a Solidity developer and somebody who's kind of taught himself a lot of this stuff and just want to share some of it with you guys. So there are a number of different ways of sending Ether, the native token on Ethereum, from one contract to another or one address to another. And these can be quite important to understand because they are sometimes at the core of different vulnerabilities on different smart contracts. So in order to make sure that your contracts are secure, you need to understand what these different ways are of moving Ether around between contracts and externally owned addresses. So I've tried to outline 6 different ways here today. The first is very simple, and it's when you have a direct transfer via function call. So you would have a contract which has, for example, a deposit function on it, which is a payable function, and you can make a call to that function and attach Ether to that function call and get Ether onto the contract that way. The second way, or the second set of ways, is through these 3 methods that are available that are built into Ethereum, where these methods are attached to any payable address. So you can call address.transfer, address.send, address.call. It's a bit confusing why there are 3 different methods, because they essentially do the same thing, but they came along at different times in Solidity's development and they have slightly different features to them. So you can think of call, the third option, as the most low level, and then transfer and send are a little bit more limited in scope. So let's take a look at these 3 in turn, and remember that each of them can only be called on an address which is payable. So that means either an EOA, externally owned address, or if it's a smart contract, the smart contract must have a payable function in it. So it could be a fallback function, could be a receive function. That doesn't really matter, it just has to have at least one payable function in it. So let's step through the 3 different types. The transfer method, so again, built-in method. This one automatically reverts on failure, and the safety feature that it has in it is that it limits the amount of gas that it sends to the recipient to 2,300 gas. Now, why is this important? It's important because this gas is used to execute the fallback function that gets called when you send Ether to that contract. And some of the hacks that have happened in the past, particularly reentrancy hacks, have been done via this fallback function. So if you limit the fallback function to 2,300 gas, it can basically just log an event. It can't execute any more complicated logic, such as re-entering the original contract. So that would work, but this method would fail if you had complex fallback functions that you actually wanted to have execute. So in that case, it wouldn't be suitable. The send method, very similar to the transfer method. The only real difference I can see is that this one requires explicit error handling. So whereas the transfer function or transfer method just reverts on failure, the send method will actually return a Boolean with true or false, saying whether it succeeded or failed, and then it's up to the developer to handle that explicitly. So again, limits to 2,300 gas. Call function, or call method, is the most flexible of the 3. And here you can send more than 2,300 gas. You can actually specify the limit. And therefore, you can have a more complex fallback function that could execute on the target contract. Again, this one requires manual success or failure handling, so you'll get back a Boolean. And this one can definitely introduce security risks if you don't use it carefully. So we've covered kind of the basics. There's a deposit function that you could call. Then there's these 3 different methods that you could use. Remembering that these 3 methods will only work if the contract still has a payable function. Now there's a slightly different way of doing this, where you can use the self-destruct function to get Ether onto a contract. If you create your own contract, you put some Ether onto it, and then you call self-destruct on it. When you call self-destruct, you get to specify an address where any Ether on your contract should be sent to. And this is one way of getting Ether onto a contract that is not payable or doesn't have a payable function on it. So yeah, slightly quirky roundabout way of getting Ether from one contract to another, but this can be quite useful, or it has been used in some attacks, so it can show you some vulnerabilities that you need to be aware of when designing your own contracts. And then finally, we can also transfer Ether using delegated calls. So if we use delegate call instead of call, we can send Ether from one contract to another. So there we go. There are all the different ways in which you can transfer Ether from one contract to another, or get Ether onto a contract. Useful to know about, as I said, for different kinds of vulnerabilities and exploits. I hope that's useful. Cheers.